My parents forgot me at home and never realized I left for good. Now they're calling, begging for my. Before I formally moved out, I had no idea how far I had drifted from my family. Nobody seemed to have noticed. My parents said nothing, asked where I was going and hardly mentioned it the following time we spoke. However, my dad did get in touch a few months later with a text, threatening to cut off my college money. Should I miss the holidays home? The truth is that 3 years ago I graduated. That's probably how disengaged they actually were, being the youngest of 5 siblings. My definition of youthful is that I have a strong 7-year difference between myself. The next sibling, it always felt to me growing up like the unseen one. My siblings were dealing with personal challenges, including sicknesses, mental health concerns, and things that required ongoing attention. I was not a problematic child either. I suppose I simply did not seem to require anything from them. I was not sick or struggling. Now, let me clear things out. I'm not advocating a poor, me kind of thinking here. That is simply how it was. You name it. The others were in and out of hospitals, therapists, and me personally, I was exactly right there. I believe a name for this is the glass child. Though they hardly pay attention to you, they can see you. I generally found that to be acceptable. I grew accustomed to reading, playing video games, surfing alone, and simply staying to myself. It was not like I had the obligation of looking after my siblings or anything. My folks managed all of it. Actually, I have heard a lot of tales about children who had to give up their youth to look after their brothers or sisters. It wasn't me. Although my parents tried their best to run everything on their own, I basically slipped through the cracks since I wasn't creating problems. I didn't receive it as I didn't need aid. I do not believe they intended anything. It's easy to see how the one who is healthy can be overlooked when 4 of your children are coping with serious medical problems. They were constantly buried in medical visits, hospital visits, and school meetings for the others. I just became the youngster who stayed out of line and avoided attention. It was not like in the movies where the unseen child is sadly neglected. It was more of a practical invisibility. My parents simply lacked the ability to pay attention to someone who did not demand continual attention. I changed then. I learned how to entertain myself and came to enjoy alone. But about 9, I also developed 2 deep friendships with Mia and Clara at the same time. 3 of us clicked right away. We bonded over our families since none of them paid much attention to us. We were all sort of in the same boat. Mia's family was somewhat chaotic and Clara's parents worked non-stop, so she was essentially left to run her own life. We knew each other in a way that seemed natural. We felt as though we didn't even need to discuss how we felt excluded or disregarded. They evolved over time to resemble my actual family more than they ever did in biology, over middle school, high school, and finally college. We stayed close. Just the 3 of us decided to move to a different state when we graduated. It felt as though we had created our own small family from leftovers, from what our own households could not offer regarding my relationship with my parents. After I moved out of the house, it was essentially non-existent. We hardly spoke, but that was not a big departure. Neither had we had truly when I was living there. Every now and then my mother would text, usually with basic small talk like how's school, where are you working right now? Though that was only surface level, it was genuinely a change for my teenage years. We hardly spoke at all back then. I honestly didn't ask for much either. I expected little from them. But one phone conversation from my mother last year made it really evident how cut off we were. She contacted me out of the blue several days before Thanksgiving. We never talk now, so I sensed something was wrong right away. I believe my last phone conversation with her was 1 year ago when she informed me about a funeral for one of my sisters. We hardly spoke like this. I was thus very taken aback when she asked what time I was arriving for Thanksgiving. I never knew they were even organizing Thanksgiving activities. Thanksgiving was not really important in our family growing up when they even tried to celebrate it. I can only recall perhaps 2 or 3 times. Those efforts were not really noteworthy. I told her I already intended to go on a ski trip with Mia and Clara. We had months of preparation, hence I wasn't going to chuck everything and fly 2 states over for a last-minute supper. Aside from that, I would have had to arrange a plane ticket long in advance. Should she have wanted me there? She did not, however, accept it well, saying she would be all alone as my dad was seeing my brother in the facility where he is over Thanksgiving. She started guilt-tripping me and behaved like I was being demanding. My mom didn't want to be by herself, apparently. My dad was going to be gone most of the day. Though she gave me 3 days' notice, I knew where she was coming from. What was my expected course of action? Just drop everything and wonderfully show up. She became enraged when I informed her once more, I cannot make it. She hung up on me after accusing me of not showing the family any concern. At first I felt bad, perhaps as if I was being selfish. But later I gave more thinking. I hadn't heard from them in ages. So suddenly I was the terrible person for not stopping to head home for Thanksgiving. I went over our old books just to be sure I hadn't overlooked anything, but no. There was not one reference of Thanksgiving plans about wanting to see me. Nothing stands. At end. She dumped everything on me, expecting me to be there without even asking. Since I had already scheduled a ski trip with Mia and Clara later that evening, I tested her, letting her know I wouldn't be unable to make it home for Christmas either, saying we could hook up after the new year. I tried to be friendly about it, but she ignored. A few days went by, and I still couldn't quite get rid of this strange sensation when something simply nags at you and find yourself unable to explain why. I felt like this about the Thanksgiving scenario overall. Like my mother anticipated of me, I was a mind reader. They never told me they had any plans, but yet I was supposed to simply know and turn up. Didn't make sense. Still, I tried to go forward. For months of preparing the ski trip we were looking forward thrilled me. We were all looking forward a decent vacation because Mia, Clara, and I hadn't had one in what felt like ever. But exactly when I felt I could put the family conflict behind me, my dad tested me without warning. Now I realized it must be crucial since my dad never texted me. Rather than something logical though, Dad attacked me with, "If you don't come home for Christmas, I'm stopping your college payments." When I read that I laughed actually. Which college pay for which 3 years ago was my graduation year. I reasoned maybe he was referring to one of my siblings or confused. I tested him back, reminding him that I had already graduated, that he should check his bank account since someone was fooling him. If he believed he was still paying for my tuition, I assumed that would mark the end of it. Once he knew I no longer attended classes, I thought he would feel a little ridiculous. A few hours later though, I received another text from him complaining that I was unappreciative and self-serving. He continued on about how much my siblings and I had given for each other, and how I failed to value any of it. That is the moment I started to lose it. I never asked them anything to start with. Second, since my grandmother handled it, I had no idea they had been paying for my college. She bore all the expenses herself since she told me straight out. She wanted my parents meddling with my schooling. What my dad was even talking about eluded me. Though I already had plans, I tested him back gently, reminding him that Grandma had paid for my schooling, and that I would be glad to catch up following the holidays. Still, it was only one stop testing me about how I had turned my back on the family, and how I had deserted them. My dad chose to enter full drama mode. "I'm done helping you out if you don't make an effort," he said at closing. Totally confused, I looked at my phone, left the family behind. Having lived on my own for years, they hardly noticed. Suddenly, now I was the bad guy as I wouldn't stop everything to go Christmas home. It shocked me. Though I tried to let it go, the more I considered it, the more enraged I became in months. They had not talked to me. They hadn't inquired how I was feeling. The second they wanted something, it was somehow my duty to bring everything back under control. Their backup strategy was supposed to be me. I vented on calls to Mia and Clara. As always, Mia was sympathetic. She remarked that it seemed as though my parents wanted me home for Christmas, so they would not feel awful about themselves, not because they really wanted to see me. Clara, however, let go without restraint. She said somewhat frankly, "Screw them. You owe them nothing." I chose to sleep about it that evening before answering once more. My phone buzzed once more though, while I was trying to relax in bed. "Dad, was it? If you don't come home, don't bother coming back at all." The brief and frigid text said. Feeling numb, I focused on the message. From not speaking for months to today, how had we changed? How had things gotten so bad that my own dad was essentially rejecting me because I missed Christmas home? Defies logic. Part of me wanted to blast him on all the times. They had neglected me all the times. When I felt like I didn't even exist in that house, I didn't though. Rather, I just sat down my phone and attempted to go asleep right before the holidays. I wanted no part in their turmoil. I wanted no more dealing with the guilt, trips, accusations, manipulation. I simply wanted to pay attention to my own life. Once more. More texts from my mother greeted me when I woke up the following morning. She claimed they didn't know why I was acting so detached and felt let down in me. "We hope you'll change your mind," she said at closing. I laughed, unable, not sure why I had been far away all my life. They were only now noticing ignoring their messages would at least enough to enjoy the ski trip, help me to get some mental calm, though life wasn't done, tossing curveballs at me. I was so eager to get on from the turmoil that came out of nowhere, just beginning to get back into my regular schedule. I was home from the trip when I received a message from Jake. My older brother. It seemed like ages had gone between Jake and me among my siblings. I always felt he was the one who might relate to me. He wasn't coping with the same degree of health problems as my other siblings. Hence, I thought we could have a chance to get close growing up, but he was always overly preoccupied with his own affairs, so never truly happened. Whatever, I was therefore startled when I saw his name show up on my phone. His admonition was straightforward. We need to talk. Though I wasn't exactly in the mood for more family strife, and I had no idea what he wanted. Curiosity won out. I responded by texting about what. Very few minutes later my phone rang. Jake, was it? I wondered whether to respond, but once more curiosity went out. I grabbed, and before I could even say hello, Jake started right away. Mom and Dad have been talking about making you the legal guardian for one of the boys, when they're gone. I swear I dropped my phone practically. My heart began to race. And I just sat there shocked. Was this merely a type of joke? Now after all these years of hardly living they were going to dump this on me. The devil are you talking about? I at last managed to inquire Jake's side as though I were the one acting irrationally. How things are with Mom and Dad, with the lads they have a lot on their plate. And they are not going to be around always. They must know someone will be covering for them and looking after things when they are away. My blood was heating, right? Then they believe that someone is me. After all the ignoring the guilt trips, they simply believe I'll drop everything and take over their mess. Jake seemed not to understand why I was so offended. You are the only one who is truly consistent. I realize it's a lot. The rest of us have personal problems. I nearly started laughing at that. Indeed, maybe they ought to have considered it before now. Not even sure this was a thing at all about none of this. They never spoke to me. They didn't tell me they were going to talk to you about it either, Jake remarked. I thought you need to know before they try to spring it on you. I was boiling. This is beyond Christmas or Thanksgiving now. This is more general. They hadn't even considered me until now. When it would be most convenient for them, they were preparing something long-term. After not speaking to me in years, they now wanted me to act as the responsible one. They had been talking behind my back, still getting my head around it. I asked like they just decided I would handle the chores without even asking me. Pretty almost, Jake said. They have been organizing it for some time. Silent. I sat there staring at the wall and tried to sort through everything, though I knew it wasn't really his responsibility. Part of me wanted to yell at Jake. He served as the messenger only that did not change the reality that my parents were about to screw me over in the largest possible extent. They were asking me to commit my life to tidy their mess, not just a courtesy. Finally, my voice low but firm, I stated, I'm not doing it. I am not their backup choice. They sure as hell don't deserve to make me liable for everything now. They didn't give a damn about me for the last 25 years. Silent for a minute, Jake finally answered. I understand. I am still. You are a member of the family. That term family started me to yell. I was a member of the family simply as it would be most convenient for them. Only when they specifically needed something, they didn't give a damn whether I was fine or whether I needed help when I was little. But I was suddenly the one they wanted now as they were afraid of the future. Cutting him off, I answered, tell them I'm not interested and don't bother phoning me about this again. Before Jake could reply, I hung up, then spent some time sitting there staring at my phone trying to cool off. My entire existence had seemed to be preparing me for this moment, that which would at last provide enough of the treks through guilt, enough of the books with manipulation in mind, enough of being overlooked and therefore exploited. Not going to be their safety net was me. A few days went without any communication from my folks or Jake. They seemed to be waiting for me to come to my senses, to alter my mind and be the decent daughter they had unexpectedly decided I ought to be. But I hardly wanted to move. Just because I was the last one left standing, I wasn't going to let them load their troubles on me. A letter then arrived by mail. My mother sent it. She had merely sent a letter like we were living in the 1800s or something, not even phoned, long and disorganized. The letter included the same guilt-tripping trash I had heard previously. She continued on how much they needed me, how difficult things were for them, how they lacked knowledge on what they would do. Should I not be there? Still, the last bit truly infuriated me. Olivia, my mother said, we are not demanding much, simply said someone will cover for the family when we are away. That was when it dawned on me. They gave no thought to me. Their only concern was ensuring their mess was taken care of once they left. They missed or loved me. Thus they didn't want me back into their life. Given my convenience, they wanted me because I was the only one not to have broken apart. I put the letter in the garbage after folding. It crumpled. I quit, though naturally it wasn't. I considered it to be the end of it. Not quite right. 2 weeks or so later, I received another call, this one from an unidentified number. Though I nearly missed it, something in me piqued interest. Possibly it was Jake once more, or even one of my parents trying to get in touch from another phone because I had been neglecting theirs. In both cases I picked up. Hello Olivia, it is Sarah. Among my sisters, Sarah was one. We were not very close. She was always handling her own affairs, hospitals, therapists, the entire gamut. Growing up made me feel guilty. Yet we never really know one another. Hearing from her now, following everything, seemed odd. I asked warily, what then is happening? On the other side there was a protracted silence that suggested growing tension. Sarah said, at last, I know things have been kind of rough between you and Mom and Dad. But I really need you to listen to what I'm going to say. I squared myself for whatever was ahead. What is it? She spoke alone. They're not doing well. Like truly not doing very well. Dad's health is rapidly declining. They are panicking as nobody is volunteering to assist with the boys. Olivia, she is terrified. They are clueless on what to do. For a second, I said nothing. It was hardly that I lacked interest. Sure I did. Not even my parents never wanted anyone to suffer, but after all, they had gone through. I couldn't just jump in and straighten things for them. I was not their band-aid. I regret to learn that. I said gently, but I cannot just stop everything, Sarah. I lead a life as well. She let out a sigh, obviously annoyed. I get that. But only you are in a position to assist. Jake's barely hanging together and what's happening with the others and myself. Olivia, no one else exists here. Desperate. Are they determined? Since they turned aside this for years, I shot back. They let this all build up thinking it would just go away. Now it falls on me since I was the one who managed to escape and start something of my life. That is unfair, Sarah. She said slowly. I know it's not fair, but right now is where we live. They call for assistance. Once more here, was it same old narrative, same old guilt. No matter what I did or how far I attempted to separate myself, they always managed to bring me back in. I'm not doing it, I said with great conviction. I am not the one going to tidy their mess. When I was a child, they showed no interest in me. Now they just come to see me because it's practical. I have a life of mine. They must work things out on their own. When Sarah spoke once again, I could hear her hurting. I understand, Olivia, truly I do still. This is not about you or me, speaks to the family. It's about what the lads will be left with once they go, who will step forward if we don't. That struck harder than I had anticipated, not because I became suddenly responsible, but rather because I understood our collective captivity, years of mistreatment by my parents who had pushed me aside. Now they were trying to use me as their escape route. My brothers, caught in the center of it all, were exactly as imprisoned as I was, just they lacked the will to rebel. Again, I apologize softly this time, but I'm not able, I will not. There was a long silence as Sarah's disappointment weighed on the phone, but not this time. I was not going to cave. Finally, her voice flat. She said, I'll let them know. She hung up before I could say anything else. I simply sat there staring at my phone, conflicted in guilt and relief. I owed neither my parents anything, I am aware of that. Still, it injured. Knowing that my family was disintegrating, hurt, I had no power to stop it. Alternatively, I might not have been helpless, simply said I no longer wanted to give myself up for them. A few days following that call to Sarah, my mother sent another letter. This one lagged behind the last. She hardly gave greetings. Any thought this time? No, how are you? She headed right for the guilt trip? We miss you. Her disappointment in me, how I was failing the family, and her inability to believe I would turn my back on them in their hour of need, defined everything. It was terrible. She continued on about how difficult life was for her and Dad, how much they had given us and how she had no idea what she had done to merit a selfish daughter. I briefly experienced that old familiar sense of remorse, growing up, the same guilt I experienced, always being the one who never truly paid attention to the one who never caused disturbance, the one who never needed help. Still, something clicked. As I went over the letter once more, since they liked me or missed me, I understood this had nothing to do with me supporting them. This has to do with control. This was about them attempting to make me feel as though I owed them something, so dragging me back into their orbit. I owed them nothing at all, not now. Like the last letter, I crumpled it and threw it in the garbage. I had finished acting as their pawn, done, allowing them to control me, done with the drama and guilt excursions. Now I had my own life, and I refused to let them rob me of that. The following day I decided something. I blocked their numbers, those of my dad, mother, and even Jake. Any more unexpected calls or texts that would send me back into the situation would have been unacceptable to risk, though it was not a simple choice. It was the only one that seemed appropriate. Every time they wanted something, I could not stop allowing them to drag me back in. They made decisions. Now they had to live with them. Blocking them initially seemed like a release. It was as if this weight had been taken off my shoulders. And for the first time in a long time, I was in charge of the circumstances, not sitting there waiting for another guilt-tripping message or surprise call. It was silence, harmony. It felt fantastic. Naturally, though, did not last, not at all, either 2 weeks or so. After I blocked their phones, I received a knock on my door, not expecting anyone. I assumed it was a delivery or perhaps a neighbor, but when I answered the door, there she was, my mother, right there on my doorstep. She looked different, older, more worn out, but also resolute. As she had every right to be there, I have no idea where she discovered me. Although I hadn't been hiding, I most certainly wouldn't have expected her to arrive at my house in this state. She first said nothing and only stared at me as though she were looking for something. At last she said, "We have to chat, Olivia." I sighed. "No, we truly do not." I had already addressed all I needed to. I decided as follows. She moved forward as though she were about to enter, but I hardly moved. Rising in the doorway, I blocked her path. "Not this time." I was not intending to let her inner voice lower now. She said, "Please just listen. Your father's condition is growing worse. He visits the hospital in and out. We have no idea how long he has left. Olivia, I know nothing about what to do, right?" There was the card she had been clinging to. She knew one that would really hit me. "The card with your father is dying." She said nothing straightforward, but I could hear it in her voice. I am not merciless either. I wanted my dad not to suffer, but after all they had put me through, I couldn't simply drop everything and dash to their side like nothing had happened. I apologized, trying to keep my voice calm. "Still, this is not my issue. Years of figuring this out have gone between you and Dad. You cannot just turn up right now and hope I will solve everything." She gave me the look of someone I had smacked. "I'm not calling for your fixing of anything. Simply put, you are here for the family." I nearly chuckled. "For the household." Regarding what family? The one who turned away from me 25 years ago. The one that only speaks with me when they need something. "Mom, that family is not what we have. That is manipulative." Her eyes grew wide. For a while, I assumed she would be argumentative with me. She simply started crying though, right there on my front porch. She started crying and I knew nothing to do, though I also couldn't just stand there and watch her weep. I wasn't going to invite her inside. "Look," I remarked, somewhat lowering my voice. "I understand this presents challenges for you. I am indeed. Still, I am not your backup strategy. I am not the one going to show up to fix things. You made decisions. Now you have to deal with them." She cleaned her eyes and raised her head to meet me, and I could see the wrath beginning to replace the grief. "Olivia, we did the best we could. You are not aware of what it was like, raising all of you and juggling everything. We were trying to keep everyone else alive. Hence, we ran out of time for you. Right?" There was the justification I had heard 1,000,000 times before. Their lack of presence for me had as its justification. Why had I been sidelined, disregarded, forgotten? "And that's not my fault," I said firmly. "You decided to bear 5 children. You decided to drop me behind and concentrate on everyone else. Not mine. That was your choice. And right now you're attempting to shame me about it, Mom." "I refuse to do it. I will not." She stayed there for a long period of silence, staring at me as though she no longer recognized me. She might also not have done. Perhaps in her mind I was still the small child she could overlook since I wasn't acting disruptively, but I was no more that little daughter. "I finished being invisible at last." She spoke. "Sit. Then you just are going to turn away from us?" "No. Many years ago you turned away from me. I am just leaving at last." She had nothing to say about it. She simply turned and started back toward her car, feeling a weird mix of emotions. Part of me was depressed, but most of me felt free. I watched her leave, like I should have let go of a long time ago, something I had been carrying about for years. Finally, I walked back inside after she was gone and sat down to try to make sense of everything that had lately happened. I stopped feeling enraged. I was not even wounded. I simply executed, carried out with the guilt, accomplished by manipulation done, always feeling as though I was inadequate. I was not going to be their backup strategy. Not going to be their last choice was me. I was going to let them drag me down no longer. I had my own life to live. The next several weeks passed silently. No calls, not one letter, none at all. Honestly, that was the best I had felt in a long time. It seemed as though they had at last received the word. I paid attention to my career, to my friends, creating my own life. I was not staring over my shoulder, waiting for the next drama around for once. I was living outside of their expectations now. About a month later, too, I received an email. This time it came from Jake, not from my dad or mom, though it was just a few phrases. The email said all I needed to know. "Dad went away yesterday night. You ought to know." I thought I spent a lot of time staring at the email, not knowing how I felt. Not surprised was me, though I knew this was coming. I also felt not depressed. To be honest, I felt little of anything. I gave some consideration to answering. I considered phoning Jake to find out how he was doing, possibly even extending my sympathies. Then I saw that this was really another opportunity for them to drag me back in another phase in the same cycle. And I had not fallen for it this time. Closed the email, not responding, and carried on with my day. I was finally fine with not being in their world anymore. I believed that the death of my dad would mark the end of everything, the last chapter in this protracted, draining story. I thought of myself as having made peace with it. After all, I hadn't been in their life for a long time. I wasn't shocked when Jake sent his email. I was in a sense relieved. Years ago, I had already suffered the loss of my family until they wanted something from me. I was not worth noting. For the next few weeks, life proceeded as gently and softly as before. I threw myself into my career, into my friends, into creating the life I wanted, one free from the continual pressure, guilt, and manipulation I had grown up with. I sensed for the first time in my life that I was really living for myself. Then, though, I received another letter just when I felt I was in clear. This one came from a lawyer, My mother was not involved, knowing deep down that whatever was within would not be good. I opened it with a sickening feeling in my gut enough. It concerned my dad's estate. According to the letter, I was in charge of all the legal paperwork now that Dad was gone. As my parents had designated me as the executor of the will, it still astounds me after everything. After years of emotionally cutting me out, they had the gall to make me answerable for tidying the wreckage they left behind. It was virtually ridiculous. When Dad was living, they did not want me around. However, now that he was gone, I became suddenly vital enough to manage their business. It was the last face slap, though I wanted to, like I had with the others, rip up the letter and toss it in the garbage. This was now a legal requirement, not only some guilt trip. One more time they had imprisoned me. For what felt like hours I fixed my gaze on the letter, the weight of which settled in their last play, their last try to bring me under control from beyond the tomb. Was this? They had made sure I couldn't really flee them even in death. Still, this time things would be different. I was not the invisible, terrified child they could push around anymore. I was not going to let them drag me back into their guilt-ridden manipulative universe after some back and forth. I set up a meeting after phoning the attorney identified on the letter. I resolved myself to move through this procedure as rapidly and painlessly as I knew I couldn't simply ignore it. Even if I wanted nothing to do with their estate, I had to face it, cope with it, push forward for better, to put it mildly. Conference with the attorney was uncomfortable. Although he was courteous, I could sense his uncertainty about the reason I appeared to be so disengaged. Though I had previously spent years grieving the loss of my family, most people are more upset when faced with a parent's will. I had not found this fresh. I had been living without them for a protracted period. We examined the specifics of the estate, and Dad had left everything to be divided among the children exactly what I expected. There was only the house, a little savings account, and some personal items, customary stuff. But what startled me was a particular phrase in the will should something happen to my parents. It said I was to be awarded full guardianship over my younger brother David. It seemed unbelievable. They had included that in the will, even after everything, even after I had made it abundantly obvious to them that I was not going to assume that duty. It was as though they had not heard one word I had spoken, like they had always done. They were still trying to dominate me to make me feel obliged to look after everyone else. Though I kept my cool, could feel the rage building inside me. I gently informed the attorney that I would not be taking guardianship and that they would have to come up with another David solution. Though I realized David needed someone to look after him, I was not heartless. That person was not going to be me. I wasn't going to let my parents shame me into giving my life up for their errors. They chose to overlook it until the last, even though they had plenty of time to arrange for this. Though he acknowledged and noted it, the attorney seemed a little surprised by my rejection that day. I left the office with an unusual sense of closure. This was the last chapter that whereby I formally severed ties with the past and carried on with my life. I had decided, and I was not going to let anyone, not even the last-ditch effort from beyond the grave, change that. A few days later, Jake sent still another email. This time it had nothing to do with the will or the estate. It was more intimate. Although he claimed he knew why I was doing what I was, he asked if I might change for the benefit of the family. He said, Mom wasn't doing well, everyone was suffering. And David needed someone consistent in his life, just packaged in different languages. It was the same old story, the same old guilt trip. I gave it much thought over a long period. Part of me wanted to give in, be the decent sister, the one who volunteered when nobody else could. But then I realized all the years I spent unnoticed, all the times they disregarded me unless they absolutely needed something. I recalled the remorse, the manipulation, and the sense of being used. And I realized I could never return to that. Couldn't let them drag me back in once more. Though I kept it brief, I answered Jake's email. I apologized for the difficulty, but I could not be the person they required me to be. Now I had my own life. I refused to give it up for a family that had never been there for me. Though I wanted him the best, I made it plain that for me, this was the end of the road. I felt lighter than I have in years after emailing it. It was as if I had at least dropped the last bit of the weight I had been dragging about for so long. I lost my anger. I stayed not depressed, I merely freely. I had first completely broken free from the expectations, the guilt, and the manipulation in my life. I was going to let nobody take anything from me. I had my own life to live. The next several months were quiet. Emails, letters, and surprise visits are no more. I began to concentrate on creating the life I had always been due. I got back in touch with friends, dug deeper into my work, and for the first time in what seemed like eternity, I let myself simply be joyful, to live free from the weight of expectations from my family hovering over me. I came to see that ultimately family is more than only the folks your blood relatives know, the individuals who show up for you, who worry about you, who are there for you when you most need them, are the ones that were Mia and Clara. The two persons who had supported me through all. These were my actual family, the ones who embraced me for who I was and saw my imperfections and all regarding my folks. They made their decisions. They decided to push me aside, to overlook me, to utilize me just when it would be most handy for them. For not doing more, I had spent so many years feeling inadequate and guilty. But I realized then that I was not the issue. There were, and I was not going to allow their decisions to define me anymore. Though I have no idea what the future holds for my siblings or what will happen with David, one thing is certain: I am free from their expectations. I am free to live on my own without their guilt weighing me down. I am really free for the first time in my life.